Still to come. From 4, Nikki Campbell. At 3, Fern and Reggie. Right now, classic albums with Roger Scott.
BBC Radio 1 Vintage.
I'm Richard Skinner. Classic Albums is a show that I was associated with, but was originated by a producer called John Pidgeon, who also interviewed and wrote about pop music, and the great presenter Roger Scott, who is one of the finest broadcasters of his generation, in my opinion. He had that sort of American air without a mid-Atlantic accent. He was distinctly British, but you could tell he'd worked in American radio. He never talked too much. It wasn't all about him. It was about the music. He had a great sense of humour. He knew the music inside out, and I think by far, at that point, he was probably the best radio presenter in Britain. That's why he was the perfect presenter for the Classic Albums series, because, you know, he knew his stuff. He really knew his stuff. The concept was so simple, but no one had done it before. There are classic albums, so why not go to the people who made the classic album and talk them through it, track by track, find out how they did it, how they approached it, who recorded it, where they wrote it, and get the background stories. Now, no one had done it before. It's unbelievable. John and Roger put it together. They pitched it to Radio 1. It deservedly became a classic in its own right, and indeed it spawned a TV series in its own image. Roger was a very decent man, and in the latter part of his life, when he was very, very ill, he soldiered on beyond the point that, you know, you would think you couldn't broadcast, and he did. And when he couldn't come in, they took the microphone to him, and he was recording the links for his shows, basically on his deathbed. The day before he died, actually, he phoned me. And it was a very emotional and difficult phone call, and he wished me luck with the show, because I was going to sit in for him the following week, and he was sort of he handed it over to me and said, you know, be good, and I know you'll look after these shows. And I kind of said, no, you'll be back, but he wasn't, and sadly the next day he was gone. I'm very proud to have been associated with it, because I think if you go back to those shows, they still sound relevant today, because the stories are just as important today as they were when the shows were recorded back in the 80s and 90s.
Radio 1 Vintage.
And now Radio 1 presents Classic Albums, the series which reassesses some of the most popular albums of the rock era. The programmes are presented by Roger Scott.
Radio 1 Vintage.
2 years might seem too soon to record an album classic status, but few would argue with the right of the album we're about to reappraise to take a shortcut to that category. It's 1987, and our classic album is The Joshua Tree by U2. Looking back with me for the next 60 minutes is The Edge.
It was one of those things, like you'd be walking down the street, you know, and you'd hear it coming out of shops, you'd hear it on every station, you'd hear it like in lifts, you know, it was weird, it was everywhere for that period.
U2 had made 5 albums since their debut in 1980. Boy, October, War, The Live Under a Blood Red Sky, and The Unforgettable Fire, recorded in 1984 with Brian Eno producing for the first time. So how did they set about the 6th?
The sessions for The Joshua Tree were split into 4 different parts. The first one we decided was just going to be fun, it was going to be experimentation, and Brian Eno came over, and we just moved into this big house in the foothills of the Dublin Mountains, and for about 3 weeks we just started just letting our imaginations totally run wild, and we did about 20 or 30 different pieces. I had this new device which I was trying out called the Infinite Guitar, which was invented by a friend of mine, Michael Brook, and I had a prototype. It was, you know, it's all sort of wires and gaffer tape and whatever, and I was playing with it in the room next to where I think Adam and Bono were going through the song with just a drum machine, just trying to work out arrangement ideas, and they could like hear this sound coming from the other room. They didn't even know what it was, but Bono just sort of came in a couple of minutes later and said, what was that you were doing? Well, do that again in here. So we all sort of crowded into the control room. I was playing this thing. It sounds almost like a violin, you know, it's that sort of sustained note thing. And in about an hour we had really the best part of the thing recorded. We just with the drum machine, the bass and the symphonic guitar.
See the stone set in your eyes, see the thorn twist in your side. I'll wait for you. Sleight of hand and twist of fate, on a bed of nails she makes me wait, and I wait without you, with or without you, with or without you. Through the storm we reach the shore. You gave it all, but I want more, and I'm waiting for you, with or without you, with or without you. I can't live with or without you. And you give yourself away, and you give yourself away, and you give, and you give, and you give yourself away. My hands are tied, the body bruise she got me with, nothing to win and nothing left to lose. And you give yourself away, and you give yourself away, and you give, and you give, and you give yourself away, with or without you, with or without you. I can't live with or without you. With or without you, with or without you, I can't live with or without you, with or without you.
Call an album a classic, and 9 times out of 10, somebody somewhere is going to pick an argument with you. Only a handful of titles would qualify unchallenged. Ironically, one of those incontrovertible choices didn't actually have a title, and it's the album we're about to reassess right now. The year is 1971, and our classic album is the untitled Fourth by Led Zeppelin.
There's a lady who's sure all that glitters is gold, and she's buying the stairway to heaven.
Looking back with me for the next 60 minutes is Jimmy Page.
From the first sort of blues-orientated album, really. Second one was rock and roll. I think, they assumed the third one was going to be, yet again rocking on. And the added fact that Zeppelin 2 was like the classic rock album, and I think they expected, I know the record company expected a follow-up to Whole Lotta Love, which obviously there wasn't on this. But however, we always stuck to, how we were shaping at the time anyway. We never really sort of made a point of trying to emulate something that we'd done before.
To routine material for the album, Led Zeppelin installed themselves and the Rolling Stones mobile studio at Headley Grange in Hampshire. Not that it was a conventional rehearsal setup.
We had the drums in the hall sometimes, and then sometimes the drums were in the room as well, in the sitting room with the fire. And the amplifiers were... Well, when John was out in the hall, Bonzo, that is, when he was out in the hall, there'd be Jonesy and I out there with earphones, and our relative, well, he was going in DI, I think, on some things, and also amp, but the two sets of amplifiers would be in other rooms, in other parts, like cupboards and things. And, yeah, it's a very odd way of recording, but certainly worked. When you've got this whole live, creative process going on, that's how things like, for instance, rock and roll would come out.
And how exactly was that?
I think we might have been attempting 4 sticks, and it wasn't actually happening that day. And I remember Bonzo started this drum intro to, let's see, it's Keep a Knocking, I think it is. In fact, it is. It's Keep a Knocking, Little Richard. He just did that, and I just played the riff automatically, and that was rock and roll. And we got to sort of 3/4 of the way through. I think we got through the whole of the 12 bar of it. In other words, the first one I said, wait a minute, this is great, forget 4 sticks, let's work on this. And things would come out like that.
Sometimes there's a moment in a recording career when everything comes together in the studio, and standards are set which are not achieved again. Subsequent albums inevitably fall short. That wasn't the case with the album we're about to reappraise right now, because the band did not record again. The year is 1983, and our classic album is the fifth and last by The Police, Synchronicity.
Every breath you take, and every move you make, every bond you break, every step you take, I'll be watching you.
Looking back with me for the next 60 minutes is Sting.
We made it because we were a singles band. We started off as a singles band, and I think we made some of the best singles recorded at the time. I'm very proud of that. But I realized that you couldn't do that forever. You know, as you got a little older, you wanted to do work that was more substantial and cover topics that were a little more meaty and that would interest you as you got older. And so each album we tried to do, we wanted to basically get some more territory for us to be expressive in and have credence in. And so each album, I think, was a progression of sophistication, both in terms of lyrics and music. And Synchronicity was the final thing. I sat at the piano and wrote Every Breath You Take. I knew it was the biggest hit we'd ever have. I knew it was a hit, which is why it was so easy to put it on the album, despite the cries of saying it was simplistic from the other members of the band. So, yeah, I knew this record would do it, even when I just written it, when it was just a mark on a piece of paper. And it was very easy to realize it in the studio once we decided to do it. I don't know whether it was the best song I wrote. It was certainly the most powerful, certainly the most successful. I still sing it, although now it has more than one meaning.
Every breath you take, and every move you make, every bond you break, every step you take, I'll be watching you. Every single day, and every word you say, every game you play, every night you stay, I'll be watching you.
SoundCloud.com.
God Only Knows is a very pretty song. It's got the beat, you know, it has something about it.
It's that old cliche, you know, you just mirror the society that you're living in.
You know, when you look at the big picture of a record, you have to have a certain amount of this and a certain amount of that and a certain, you know, you have to salt and pepper the whole thing up. And so I dug out an old song that I had written called The Chain.
Radio 1 Vintage.
Some classic albums are a long time coming, but the longer the wait, the sweeter the success when it finally arrives. In the case of the record we're about to hear, that moment occurred almost 24 years after the first hit single. That single was A Fool in Love, an American top 30 hit in 1960. The album, our classic album from 1984, is Tina Turner's Private Dancer.
I'm your private dancer, a dancer for money. Do what you want me to do. I'm your private dancer, a dancer for money. And any old music will do.
Looking back with me for the next 60 minutes is Tina Turner.
You know, this album was done in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I finished all of my vocals 1 week, in 1 week's time. Met producers, they did what they did. Well, the first week. Second week, I went in and finished with my vocals. Then the producers, they all mixed it immediately. Roger took it right away and had it pressed and it was out. This album was done and completed, ready to be out in 1 month's time.
Next, the title track, Private Dancer, written by Mark Knopfler.
Mark produced the song and sung it. And after he did it, he felt that it was not a song for a man. So it was just sitting there on the shelf. So he gave me the track and the whole thing, because at first I was going to try to just put my voice on Mark's tapes, but there was a record company problem. So we got Mark's musicians, Dire Straits, and went in. Someone said, why did you select Private Dancer? Because it's a song about a hooker. Is it because you've been a hooker? And I was shocked. Because in the early days, I had done private parties for the rich people in Dallas, Texas, and, you know, rich parties, birthday parties. And I called that a private performance for. And private dancing, it was very close to that type of thing. So I didn't see her as a hooker, you know. And then I went, oh yeah, I could be naive about some of these things. But actually the answer was no. I took it because it was an unusual song. I never sung a song like it. And I wish you could hear Mark's version of it. It was, I'm your private dancer. And, you know, he's got a very English-sounding voice in the accent. And it was really quite beautiful. It was very arty sounding, very arty sound. But I guess Mark just decided against it. So I put the old soulful touch on it, so there it was.
Well, the men come in these places, and the men are all the same. You don't look at their faces, and you don't ask their names. You don't think of them as human. You don't think of them at all. You keep your mind on the money, keeping your eyes on the wall. I'm your private dancer, a dancer for money. Do what you want me to do. I'm your private dancer, a dancer for money. And any old music will do. I wanna make $1 million. I wanna live out by the sea, have a husband and some children. Yeah, I guess I want a family. All the men come in these places, and the men are all the same. You don't look at their faces, and you don't ask their name. I'm your private dancer, a dancer for money. I'll do what you want me to do. I'm your private dancer, a dancer for money, and any old music will do. I'm your private dancer, dancer for money. Do what you want me to do. Just a private dancer, a dancer for money, and any old music will do. Dutch marks are dollars, American Express will do nicely, thank you. Let me loosen up dancer, a dancer for money, and any old music will do. Well, the men come in these places, and the men are all the same. You don't look at their faces, and you don't ask their names. You don't think of them as human. No, you don't think of them at all. You keep your mind on the money, keeping your eyes on the wall. I'm your private dancer, a dancer for money. I'll do what you want me to do. I'm your private dancer, dancer for money, and any old music will do. I'm your private dancer, dancer for money. I'll do what you want me to do. I'm your private dancer, a dancer for money, and any old music will do. Your private dancer, dancer for money. I'm your private dancer, dancer for money. I'm your private dancer, a dancer for money. Just a private dancer, dancer for money.
Usually it takes years to judge whether an album is a classic, but every now and then a record comes along and makes such an impact that you know it's going to be up there with the all-time greats. Either that or 12 million record buyers have got it wrong. That's how many copies the album we're about to reappraise had sold at the last count, and it's still selling. Released in 1987, our classic album is Def Leppard's Hysteria. Looking back with me for the next 60 minutes is Joe Elliott.
It was possibly, for me, the hardest vocal I've ever sung. It took me ages to get it. It's just not in my register. It's just in a register that's very tricky for me. It's just a little bit too high for my low register, and it's a bit too low for my high register, so it's like my mid-range doesn't exist. So consequently, it was a very tricky number to do, and we couldn't really change the key because that made it sound weird on the guitars. A lot of times you can just change the key and it's no problem, but on this one in particular, it didn't sound good in other keys, so we just went with the best thing, and I just spent a long time getting it right, you know. But once I knew it, that was the funny thing was, once I knew it, I could sing it, because we do it live, and it's not really a problem anymore. But it was actually learning it and trying to sing it fresh in a key that I'm just not used to singing in was very difficult. But again, it's the challenge. I actually eventually did get it done, and now I can listen to it, and sometimes I still think, what the hell did I ever do that in?
Living like a bomb, baby, come on, get it on. Living like a lover with a red iPhone. Looking like a tramp, like a video bam. Demolition woman, can I be your man? Little late, television lover, baby, coordinate. Sometime, anytime, sugar me sweet. Little miss of innocent, sugar me, yeah. Yeah. Go, take the fire, shake it up, break the bubble.
Statistics rarely tell the full story. Take the classic album we're about to reappraise. The statistics read 31 weeks at the top of the American album charts, 4 top 10 singles over there, including a number 1, and total sales in excess of 26 million. Impressive. But there's a more personal statistic which counts for just as much, although it's a good deal harder to quantify, and that is 2 broken relationships within the band. Our classic album chronicles the heartbreak. The year is 1977. The band is Fleetwood Mac. The album, Rumours.
You can go your own way. Go your own way. You can call it another lonely day.
Looking back with me for the next 60 minutes are the band members who survived the turmoil and are still together today. Mick Fleetwood, John and Christine McVie, and Stevie Nicks.
The only problem with Rumours was that we were all breaking up, and that was a big problem. Because when you have to be in a room about this size, from 2 in the afternoon until 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, or maybe even the next night, it's difficult.
Open up, everything's waiting for you. You can go your own way. Go your own way.
Well, The Chain, about 9 months into the album, was they only had the solo, where it starts. I always call it When the Monsters Come, when it goes dun 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 dun. It's really creepy. That they only had from that part out, and Christine and Lindsay were really writing it, and they finally, after about 9 months, said, "Can you help us with this, because we need this rock and roll song on this record." Because, you know, when you look at the big picture of a record, you have to have a certain amount of this and a certain amount of that and a certain, you know, you have to salt and pepper the whole thing up. And so I valiantly said, all right. And so I dug out an old song that I had written called The Chain a long time before. And I thought it would melody-wise work. And it did. And Lindsay wrote the words, "Listen to the Wind Blow," and I wrote all the other words. And I wrote the melody, all the singing melody. I even wrote the "Run in the shadows, running in the shadows" at the end. And Lindsay actually did what which is one of the few times he's ever done that. He actually sang exactly what I told him to sing, because I went out and did it, and then he went out and did it with me, and then we just took my voice off, so that it would just be him. And then I just said The Chain should belong to everybody, because for 9 months it's been this solo that we've all been listening to that's great and works up into this incredible crescendo thing, and so it should belong to everybody. So as far as writers and publishing, The Chain belongs to all 5 people.
Listen to the wind blow, watch the sun rise. Run in the shadows, damn your love, damn your life. And if you don't love me now, you will never love me again. I
Radio 1
Vintage.
This is Fern.
Hello, Reggie here, and our show is up next on Radio 1 Vintage.
See you in about 20 minutes.
Radio 1
Vintage.
Sometimes the name on a record can be misleading. For instance, orchestra suggests a collective effort. Then you look at the small print and you realise the whole thing's written, arranged and produced by one man. And just in case that's not enough, he sings and plays guitar too. That's the way it is with the album we're about to hear. The year is 1976, and our classic album is A New World Record by the Electric Light Orchestra.
It's a living thing. It's a terrible thing to lose. It's a given thing. What a terrible thing to lose.
Looking back with me for the next 60 minutes is ELO's mastermind, Jeff Lynne.
That was in the days when I didn't used to go around playing them to everybody, you know, and it'd be really like a closed shop until I delivered it to the record company, which was the way I did it then, and I can't change that because that's how I was then. I was sort of, pretty insecure about it all.
I'm taking a dive. I'm moving in line, then you look back in time to the first day. I'm taking.
What happens on the record right there is that So Fine segues into Living Thing.
That was getting the 2-track and just basically switching it off, the motors off, so that it went, and when it got to the key that Living Thing was in, you cut it there and just butt it straight on. So when it reached C, which Living Thing was in, so it went down from like about maybe F sharp all the way down to C, like the tape went somewhere like that. I can't remember the exact keys, but I know it was quite a long drop. I used to do things where it used to drive DJs nuts, where you join all the tracks up together with little bits of little things, and in the end I realised that, this cutter's told me, you should leave a spiral between them, even though there's music on it, you can make it a spiral. It took me a while to catch on. I didn't know that, but anyway, I knew that by this time, that you could make a spiral and still have music on it. It takes me a while to catch on.
Sailing away on the crest of a wave, it's like magic. Oh, rolling and riding and slipping and sliding, it's magic. And you and your sweet desire, you took me, higher and higher, baby. It's a living thing. It's a terrible thing to lose. It's a given thing. What a terrible thing to lose. Making believe this is what you can see from your worst day. I'm taking a dive. I'm moving in line, then you look back in time to the first day. I'm taking. And you and your sweet desire. Don't you do it, don't you do it. Oh, higher and higher, baby. It's a living thing. It's a terrible thing to lose. It's a given thing. What a terrible thing to lose. I'm taking a dive. On the taking a dive, 'cause you can't hold the slide floating downstream. I'm taking a dive. Oh, so let her go. Don't start spoiling the show.
In a recording career spanning more than 25 years, there are certain to be highs and lows, fruitful times and fallow ones. The demands of performing to audiences all over the world, the search for new musical horizons, the pressures of success itself, all determine what goes into the recording of an album and what emerges as the end product. Even for a group known as the greatest rock and roll band in the world, not every album can be a classic, but some will always stand out from the rest, like the album we're about to reassess. The year is 1968, and our classic album is Beggar's Banquet by the Rolling Stones.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a man of wealth and taste.
Looking back with me for the next 60 minutes is Keith Richards.
We worked from 63 through to 60, so late 66, non-stop on the road. I mean, we did 340 gigs a year, 10 days to make a record, which gave you, 6 days off a year. And also you got to write songs. So kind of a little road fever, and at the same time, then everybody's suddenly dropping acid all around you and on you and in you, and it was just time to take a break. And this was our way of coming back out of that sort of vacation, little holiday, the Costa Brava. Just sort of regathering some energy and some steam, and we're kind of ready to work again, And both Mick and I and the rest of the band sort of felt, okay, we've had a good rest. Yeah, now we're itching to go. So it was really that feeling dominated that whole album.
Side 1, track 1, Sympathy for the Devil, and lyrics which sounded as if they were intended to cause a stir.
There might have been a little bit of that, but I think more the feeling would be, well, this is the way it is right now. When at that time, this, in a way, a lot of the subject matter that you write about, it depends what's going on around you, and it was time very much, just read the titles and you get a feel of what 1967, 68 were like, and so in a way you kind of use, it's that old cliche, you just mirror the society that you're living in, and it sounds a bit trite, but in fact that's, when you look back at what you've done, that's kind of what you do.
For the God save me, I shouted out.
The classic album we're about to hear was released 23 years ago, almost to the week. The advances in production techniques that have occurred in the intervening years might have blunted its innovative edge ever so slightly, but time has taken nothing from the magic of the music. The year is 1966, and our classic album is Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys.
Wouldn't it be nice if we were older, then we wouldn't have to wait so long? And wouldn't it be nice to live together in the kind of world where we belong?
Looking back with me is the group's troubled genius, Brian Wilson.
Nobody wants to do something, especially a record company, that's going to be a risk, you know? Nobody wants to take a chance. In those days, nobody did. You know, everybody kind of went with tried and proven methods for a while. And then later on, maybe in the late 60s, mid 60s to late 60s, it was a little more experimental, you know? And I just remember being a part of it, you know, and thinking to myself, wow, what a part of it I am, you know? I used to really had quite an attitude about that. God Only Knows is a very pretty song. It's got the beat, you know. It has something about it. Carl's voice tends to bring out a peace. You know what I mean? A peacefulness.
I may not always love you, but long as there are stars above you, you never need to doubt it. I'll make you so sure about it. God only knows what I'd be without